Well, hello, and welcome to the Tuesday edition of the Todd Veinotte Show. My name's Dan Ahlstrand, and I am filling in for Todd again this week. And as I speak to you, it's like somebody waved a magic wand, at least in our part of HRM here in the North End. It's like the blanket has been lifted. What a foggy start to the morning this morning. Holy smokes. But it looks like I'm looking out the window here out of the Rick House studio on the 9th floor of Yonge Tower at the corner of Yonge and Roby, and I'm seeing buildings, which I haven't seen all morning. They're starting to appear. It looks like the fog is starting to lift, although I am looking out over what we can see of the Halifax Harbor, and I'm seeing maybe an outline of Dartmouth. I know you're over there because we all love Dartmouth, but it's starting to lift over the harbor as well. So hopefully that fog is behind us. But looking at the forecast and chatting with our weather specialist, Alistair Alders, on Friday, it looks like we're in for a bit of a dreary and wet week ahead, unfortunately. But as Alistair pointed out, and I got a couple of emails from different people who were listening to our interview on Friday, and we are in desperate need of water. So I think that a wet week like this is kind of what the doctor ordered. For those of you that are perhaps taking a peek down that well and looking at pretty low levels, or are taking walks in the wilderness and noticing how low the lakes and the rivers are, anytime we can get a couple of days of this good soaking wet weather. It was just a miserable day weather-wise yesterday, and I'm assuming that is helping that situation out. Did you get out to a Remembrance Day Remember, easy for me to say. Did you get out to a Remembrance Day service yesterday? I know many of you did, despite all that wind and rain. Now, there are a number of towns and cities and communities across Canada, including in Moncton, where they've moved Remembrance Day services inside. My hometown moved their service inside the local rink, but continues to hold the more traditional services outside the Cenotaphs as well. Do you think that Halifax should hold a big service, say, I don't know, Scotiabank Centre, to take the weather out of the equation for seniors and for older veterans? It's a question that I'd like to hear from you during the open hour today. Well, it looks like we're moving closer to a work stoppage at Canada Post. 72-hour strike notice has been issued by Cup W, and we could see picket lines as early as Friday. Now, couple that with port strikes in Vancouver and in Montreal, and it could be an interesting run-up to Black Friday, which is right around the corner, and Christmas. I would think that most stores would have their stock well ahead of Black Friday sales, but Christmas may be an issue. We will speak with the Retail Council of Canada's Santo Ligotti as part of this important season gets underway, and what this could mean for Canada's retailers, and of course, the importance of Black Friday, which is now like a month long, and the following Christmas season on top of that. Election campaign continues. Votes are continuing to be cast. A total of, I think, just over 22,000 early votes have been cast as of yesterday. We're about 2,000 votes ahead of this point during the 2021 campaign. Not sure if that's a good or a bad thing, but to give us a little perspective, we welcome back to the show from Elections Nova Scotia, Naomi Shelton. Naomi, thanks for joining us.
Hello, Dan. Thanks for having me.
So we're about 22,000 votes. We're a little bit ahead. That to me suggests that people are taking advantage of all of the early voting stations that are set up across the province.
Yes, that's what what the early stats are telling us, Dan. That the voters are choosing to vote early, which is a trend not only in Nova Scotia but across Canada. That is something we've seen in the last couple of elections. And then also it's telling us that voters are finding their early voting locations and getting connected with the electoral process in this election, even though there are no VIC cards printed.
There are no VIC cards printed because of the looming and potential strike at Canada Post. But that doesn't mean you can't find out where you vote and vote without that card.
Yes, Dan, we had to make that difficult decision about the voter information cards because, as you can see now, Canada Post workers are moving ahead into that strike position. And this is the week that the latter part of this week is the week that the VIC cards would have come out. So there's a good chance that voters would have been impacted by that. So we had to make that difficult decision early on. And I know that people were questioning that decision because there wasn't a Canada Post strike on at the time. But it's just the timeline in which having to prepare those and print them and get them into the mail that we were trying to anticipate this potential and make sure that voters had one clear path, one clear message. So that message has been getting through. And we're happy to see that the early voting stats are up and that voters are connecting. And voters who are looking for a voting location, it's very easy. They can go on our website. They can use the Where Do I Vote tool. You enter your civic address, and as you're entering your address, your address should pop up. You can select that. It will tell you all of your voting locations, your returning office, your early voting locations, and your election day voting locations. If you're having trouble with the website or you're not comfortable using the website, you can certainly call the public call center at 1-800-565-1504. That's 1-800-565-1504. And the operators there will walk you through it and give you all of your voting location information.
Naomi, we can vote early right up until November 23rd, correct?
Yes, actually, you can vote early up to November the 25th. So the community polls and advance polls are open until till Saturday, November the 23rd. And that is the end of Vote Anywhere. So, Dan, during the early voting period up till November 23rd, voters in Nova Scotia can vote in any electoral district at any early voting location. And then on Monday, November the 25th, they can still vote early at the returning office in their electoral district. And then on Tuesday, the 26th, which is Election Day, they may vote at their assigned Election Day voting location or the returning office in their electoral district.
Naomi, what time are the polls open for early voting, and how long are they open?
So early voting polls are open Monday to Saturday from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. There is extended hours on Thursday, November the 21st, and Friday to November the 22nd until 8 p.m. So there's 2 extra hours each of those days. And then on Election Day, on Tuesday, November the 26th, the polls are open from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m.
And election night, of course, the polls open in the morning, and they go till when?
8 p.m. is when the polls close on Election Day. If someone is in line waiting to vote at 8 p.m., they will be allowed to vote. But if they arrive after 8 p.m., it's too late. So you want to make sure that you have that deadline in mind, 8 p.m. on Tuesday, November the 26th.
I know we've talked about this before, Naomi, but many people will want to know who wins the election, when they're going to start to see results.
So the results, there's going to be a live feed results link on our website at electionsnovascotia.ca, and they will start seeing them probably within about a half an hour of polls closing. We are using e-ballot for early voting from the close of nominations, candidate nominations, until the 25th of November. So those votes will be counted quite quickly and efficiently. And then the paper ballots from election night and the write-in ballots, those counts may take a little bit longer. But overall, because of the use of e-ballot, we will see the full results of this election come in faster than they have in the last 2 elections.
Again, that telephone number for people that don't have internet access, Naomi?
It's 1-800-565-1504, and that is our public call center.
And very quickly before I let you go, and it may be too early for you to comment on this because I just got the email half an hour ago or so. I understand that the Liberal Party has filed a complaint over some activity in Lunenburg. Have you received that complaint? Are you investigating it?
I can confirm that we have received a complaint. I have no other information at this time.
Naomi, I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
That is Naomi Shelton from Elections Nova Scotia. In case you're curious of what I'm talking about, got a release from the Nova Scotia Liberals an hour ago, maybe two. It says that the Nova Scotia Liberal Party has filed an official complaint with Elections Nova Scotia regarding a potential breach of the corrupt practices provision of the Elections Act by Lunenburg Conservative candidate Susan Corkum-Greek. According to this release from the Liberals, the incident's allegedly taking place on the morning of November the 9th, when Miss Corkum-Greek's campaign worker allegedly distributed Tim Hortons gift cards to multiple patrons in a drive-through in Lunenburg. Now, according to the complaint, Ms. Corkum-Greek was stationed at the other end of the drive-through where she reportedly thanked patrons and requested their support. The Liberals contend if this is true, the incident could represent a breach of Section 327 of the Nova Scotia Elections Act, which prohibits corrupt practices in election campaigns, including vote buying. The Nova Scotia Liberal Party has called on Elections Nova Scotia to conduct a prompt investigation to determine whether this alleged incident represents a violation of the Act. So now you're up to date with regards to that. Again, very easy to vote. Check out the Elections Nova Scotia websites, and you can find your tool. It's super easy. I did it myself. It takes you literally a minute, and it'll tell you where you can vote. And or you can call that telephone number, 1-800-565-1504 is the number, and they can get you connected with where you need to vote. Advance polls, early voting polls go from now until community polls are open across the province on Monday through Saturday until 6 o'clock in the evening, from 9 o'clock in the morning until the 23rd of November. Advance polls will begin across the province on Saturday. They'll run until the November 23rd date as well. There'll be extended hours at early voting locations on Thursday on the 21st and Friday the 22nd. Regular closing time there, 6 o'clock. They're going to extend by 2 hours on the 21st and 22nd until 8. And a reminder that voting is closed on Sundays. Again, 1-800-565-1504. You will not be receiving a voter information card in the mail. Elections Nova Scotia not doing that this time around because of the impending Canada Post strike. We're going to stop and take our first break here on the Todd Veinotte Show. But when we come back, Black Friday. We hear about it all the time. We've seen the ads. We've heard the ads. We've read the ads. Well, what does it mean to the average retailer in Canada and Nova Scotia? And how important is the Christmas season? And is there any concern about an impending work stoppage, not only at Canada Post, but we know there's a job action underway at the Port of Montreal and the Port of Vancouver. Conversation with the Retail Council of Canada's Santo Ligotti. When we come back, you're listening to the Todd Veinotte Show. I'm Dan Alstrand. We're back in minutes. Welcome back to the Todd Veinotte Show. I'm Dan Alstrand. Hope you're having a fantastic Tuesday as we get back to work and back into the swing of things after Remembrance Day yesterday and the weekend before that. The weather not looking so good, but it's better when it's raining when you're at work than when you're off on the weekend, isn't it? That's the way I always look at it. Anyway, we talked about it before the break, and It's becoming that important time of the year for retailers across Nova Scotia, here in HRM, across Nova Scotia, in fact, right across the country, as we get closer to that now infamous date, which is Black Friday, and then we move off of Black Friday, and we know the whole routine, right? Black Friday, and then Cyber Monday, and then there's all of the stuff that is associated with that. But I wonder how important Black Friday and the impending Christmas season is for retailers across Canada. Very pleased to welcome into the program to give us a little perspective on that, the Retail Council of Canada's Santo Ligotti. Santo, how are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you. How are you?
I am well. Let's start with that. How important is Black Friday to retailers?
I think it's very important, but I think I'll start by saying, we poll Canadians each and every year to understand their sentiment towards holiday spending. around 2,800 Canadians. And we heard this year that Canadians on average for the entire season will spend about $972. That's 8% more than what they spent last year. And when we look at all of these days leading up to the holiday seasons, Canadians told us that financial matters topped their list of concerns, with inflation being sort of the driver as to what will determine how much they spend, who they spend for, and what they buy. So what that means for Canadians is that they are, looking to be very mindful this holiday season when it comes to shopping. And we know that 22% of Canadians have already begun their holiday shopping, with 12% shopping year-round. However, November is expected to be the busiest shopping month, with another 41% planning to start their holiday shopping at that time, which of course is when Black Friday and Cyber Monday are. And 40% of Canadians say they will shop on Black Friday, which is about on par to last year. And same with Cyber Monday at about 36%. But when we look at how Canadians shop, we see that retailers now are offering sales earlier and they last longer. So consumers are shifting away from concentrating their spending on single shopping days. In fact, when we look at what the busiest shopping days were both in 2022 and last year, it's the day before Christmas. And what that kind of tells us here is that Black Friday is an important time of year for retailers, but it's not a do or die. And many retailers have begun their Black Friday deals much, much earlier, and they will continue past Black Friday and Cyber Monday.
So the old adage of Black Friday is that's the day that retailers start to turn a profit for their year is right. Maybe a little bit far-fetched.
Well, I think right now what we're seeing with retailers is they're capitalizing on early shoppers. We heard that 1/5 want to start their shopping early. So you'll see with retailers that those sales have already started, and many have said that prices won't be lower during Black Friday. And some will continue to have those special Black Friday deals. So they certainly do want to maximize Black Friday and Cyber Week, but at the same time taking into account that the period lasts much longer than just over a weekend from Friday to Monday.
Santo, we hear that inflation is dropping, at least statistically it's dropping. Many callers to our program say that they haven't really realized any of that yet at the stores. That being said, we're in an affordability crisis in Canada. Do you think that that's going to impact the decisions that Canadians make as we move into Black Friday and then beyond towards Christmas?
Yes. In fact, when we asked Canadians that, 71% said that they're modifying their gift-giving habits due to inflation, perhaps buying fewer gifts or focusing on sales and shopping more carefully. But they do realize that they probably have to spend more because prices have gone up. With that, that means the more mindful shopper, a shopper who really looks for value and convenience, wants to have the product available, and really thinking about, who am I buying for, what am I buying, and how much will I buy?
I hear from small retailers, Santo, when we talk about these big days like Black Friday and Cyber Monday, that it's difficult for them to compete against the larger retailers in Canada because they're able to offer steeper discounts. Do you hear that as well?
We don't hear that as much, but what I will say is that I think for the smaller retailers as well as the larger ones, it's important to look at your customer base, promote, and create value and convenience for them when they're there, like implementing targeted discounts, not just during this period, but throughout the year. Look at how do you enhance your loyalty programs if you have one, or even if you don't have one, and even flexible payment options, which are available to all retailers of any size. The idea of paying in 4 payments or 6 payments, just to make it so that the consumer feels that there's some added value for them to buy.
Santo, we've just heard on the news here half an hour ago that the Canada Post is moving towards a strike date, maybe Friday. We know that there's labor disruptions in places like the Port of Montreal and Vancouver. Will this have an impact on not necessarily on Black Friday, but maybe moving into the Christmas season?
Well, sure, because it represents a potential crisis for retailers, especially with the halted container traffic port at the ports of Montreal and Vancouver, and this looming Canada Post strike that could lead to empty shelves, delayed delayed shipments or higher consumer costs. And of course, for the smaller retailer, that's even more of an issue because they're ordering more in time than, let's say, a larger retailer who has the benefit of pre-ordering. But it does have supply chain ripple effects. As smaller retailers are struggling to get their goods, they're vulnerable because it's difficult for them to find alternative transportation solutions, and then they rely heavily on Canada Post, which also may strike, right? And it does have long-term effects on retail and inflation. Each day of closure on the ports, adding a week to the backlog, it impacts holiday sales, contributes to rising consumer prices, and of course then exacerbating inflation.
I took a walk through a local shopping mall here on the weekend, Santo, and I saw a number of the stores advertising for retail associates, help people to help with the Christmas rush. How's the labor market looking, and is that just our mall, or is that happening across the country?
I think in the retail sector, we're seeing, it remains a challenge to, bring in employment, but I think that the retailers are doing a great job in offering great incentives and, through discounts or other benefits to employees to get them to stay. But I think just like any other sector, there is pressure on labor in terms of cost of labor, as well as the amount of people who are applying for those roles and the amount of roles that are available.
Santo, appreciate your time, sir.
Thank you. Have a great day.
That is Santo Ligotti. He is with the Retail Council of Canada. It was a walk through one of the malls this weekend that's kind of raised an eyebrow. I've noticed a couple of things as of late. If you remember back to last week, we had a conversation with Kevin Russell with the Retail Properties Association, who was suggesting on the air that the numbers that they're seeing are showing that we're starting to see an increase in capacity in the rental market in HRM. And I know many of you are scratching your head, but I drove around this weekend and I went far, and I saw at least 2 signs on properties advertising apartments for rent. I have not seen that for years around here. So I don't know if that's part and parcel to that. And also I did notice walking through the mall on the weekend that a number of the stores have signs pasted to their windows looking for help for the Christmas. I get it that it's likely just to handle the Christmas rush and that kind of thing, but retail jobs are starting to pop up around there as well. Is one lead to the other? I don't know, but it's just observations from a humble news person that was out for a walk on the weekend. We're going to stop down and take a break here on the program. Still lots to come. Don't forget, it is Tuesday today. That means that Dr. Rob is going to be in after the open hour at 11 to answer all of your science-related questions. I hope that you can join us. We had a vigorous conversation last week. I hope that continues this week. The open hour goes at 11 o'clock. And remember, I'm asking a question. Open hour, you can talk about whatever it is what you want to talk about. What I'm curious to your response is that we're seeing more and more communities across Canada moving at least one of their Remembrance Day services inside to take the weather out of the equation. If you were at a cenotaph in HRM or across Nova Scotia this weekend, you got the full brunt of Mother Nature with the wind and the rain. And I know many of you did, and I know many of you don't care about it. And I know many of you will do it no matter what the weather is. But do you think that maybe we should consider taking a look at moving a service indoors into a place like the Forum or to the Scotiabank Centre here in HRM to take the weather out of the equation for older members of our community and older veterans? Just a question I'm going to ask you for the open hour. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, new polling data is out that just released hot off the presses this morning. As we continue on the election campaign, we'll take a closer look at what the respondents to this latest survey have had to say. You're listening to The Todd Veinotte Show. I'm Dan Ulstrand. We are back in minutes. Welcome back to the Todd Veinotte Show. I'm Dan Olstrand. Hope you're having a fantastic day. Still to come on the program today, before the top of the clock, we're going to have a conversation with the food professor, Sylvain Charlesbois, who will join us to talk a little bit about what the result of the election south of the border will have on the Canadian food sector. So we'll look forward to having a conversation with Sylvain Charlesbois from Dalhousie University coming up here. And before that, new poll, I think you might have heard it in the news here earlier, was released today as we continue to roll along in the election campaign, and it appears that the PCs, led by, of course, Tim Houston, are stretching out their lead a little bit. The new data comes to us from MQO Research, and this new data showing that preference for the premier, person who you would like to see lead the province for the next 4 years or less, is overwhelmingly towards Tim Houston and the PCs at 51% support. The NDP coming in second place at 25%. The Liberals down to 19% support. And that, of course, is based on the premier number. So I guess it's probably better to say Tim Houston gets 51% of the support, Claudia Chender at 25% support, 19% support for Zach Churchill. This does say that about half of Nova Scotians polled have made up their mind so far. So still a large number of undecided voters with regards to this coming election. The part that kind of caught my attention, and I'm curious if it caught yours as well, and we can open up the telephone lines after the news at 11 o'clock and get your thoughts on this latest polling number. But the PCs have a clean sweep in each of the regions across Nova Scotia. Now, we knew that they would do well in the North Shore region. That showing 52% support for the PCs, 18% for the NDP, and the Liberals at 13%. No numbers on any independents. We know that Elizabeth Smith McCrossin is running up there and would poll very high on these on this data, but this is overall party support. Cape Breton also very strong PC at 52% to the Liberals, second place at 23%, and the NDP at 16%. Now, where it starts to get a little bit interesting to me is as we go into the Annapolis Valley and into southern Nova Scotia. The Annapolis Valley heavily favoring the PCs at 58% support, the Liberals in the distant second place at 20%, and the NDP 14%. Southern Nova Scotia also skewing very heavily to the PCs according to this latest data from MQO Research at 48% support, the NDP at 27% support, the Liberals in third place at 21% support. And the reason why that raised an eyebrow for me is that Liberal leader Zach Churchill represents the riding of Yarmouth. So some concern, I would think, for the Liberal Party in the south of the province. And here in HRM, it's broken down a little bit more. It's broken into three different sections. Overall support shows the PCs with the lead at 40%, the NDP in second place at 31%, and the Liberals at 20% support. Now, in the urban areas of HRM, that support gets narrowed down a little bit more from the PCs at 38%. The NDP very close in second place at 36%, and the Liberal Party at 19% support. The suburban areas of HRM, which we know is a large area, we see 44% support for the PCs, 29% support for the NDP, and the Liberal Party at 18%. That 38 to 36 between the governing PCs and the NDP is an interesting race to watch, I think, as we move into this election campaign. That will be a very, very tight vote, I think, in the urban areas. But outside of the urban area of HRM, it looks like a pretty comfortable lead, at least to this point, for the PCs led by Tim Houston. This responses, by the way, were collected November the 3rd and between the 3rd of November and the 10th of November. They exclude undecided voters and people that have said they're not going to vote. That's 22% of all respondents in that survey. When broken down, by a demographic, which we don't see often, at least in these releases. I don't see the breakdown like this before. And I'm curious as to some of the names on this. Anyway, we know that the boomers are 70 plus. Very strong support for the PC party at 55%. Jen Jones, which is 60 to 69. I've not heard that demographic before. The only Jen Jones I ever heard of was a curler. But anyway, Generation Jones apparently is a thing, according to this research. That's the 60 to 69 age demographic, and even stronger support for the PCs at 62% to the 14% of the NDP and the 22% of the Liberals. Now, Gen X, which I'm familiar with, that's all I'll say, 43% support for the PCs, with second place as the NDP at a long way back at 28. Millennials, 28 to 43, Vanessa's demographic, 41% to 25% for the NDP, 20% for the Liberals. And Gen Z, they're getting into that voting age. Gen Z's 18 to 27, by the way. And everybody's just feeling really old right now. But anyway, that one's a tighter race, a much tighter race in that early demographic. That 18 to 27 group has 32% for the Progressive Conservative Party, 29% for the New Democrats, and 22% for the Liberal Party. So it seems that the based on my rudimentary math, between the Gen X's, the Millennials, and the Gen Z's is where the NDP support lies. A lot less in that 60 to 69 group, and maybe a little bit more in the 70 plus group. But that 60 to 69 group has strong support for the PC party of Nova Scotia. Now, there's all kinds of interesting numbers in here, but another interesting number is that while voters say that they're willing to send Tim Houston back to the Premier's chair, they have a to-do list for them, of course. Many not happy with the current Nova Scotia government. They're willing to give him another chance, but they're not happy. 44% of respondents said they're satisfied. That goes from anywhere from a little bit satisfied to very satisfied, whereas 38% are a little dissatisfied to very dissatisfied. And the number one issue that's come out of this election campaign, and I think if you've been listening to the program for any length of time, you know that housing costs, cost of living, and affordability are the number one issues, according to the respondents to this poll. Number two, healthcare services and accessibility. And three, as I mentioned before, housing costs and availability. So cost of living and affordability, number one at 38%. Third place, housing cost and availability, which I think you can probably lump into one. That's another 14%. So that's way out in front of the second place issue, and that is healthcare services and availability. You'll be able to read all of this information if you want to catch the poll numbers for yourself at mqoresearch.com. It's available online for you to read. We're going to stop down and take another break. But when we come back, a conversation with the food professor. Sylvain Charlesbois is in the studio. We're going to talk about the impact of the U.S. election result on Canada's food sector. You're listening to The Todd Veinotte Show. I'm Dan Ahlstrand. We're back in minutes.
Thanks.
Well, welcome back to The Todd Veinotte Show. I'm Dan Ahlstrand. It's always fun when we have our next guest come into the studio, because we get a look at something that it impacts each and every one of us almost every day, and that, of course, is Canada's food sector, and that is the food professor, Sylvain Charlesbois. Sylvain, how are you?
Good, Dan. How are you? Almost every day. Every day, right? But and we've had I don't know how many conversations. Well, I think this is the first time that we've done this face to face. Yeah, absolutely.
We've had many conversations about how angry I get when I go to the grocery store and those kind of things. But this one's a little bit different, because it's we know that Canada's food supply chain and is very integrated into how across North America we've got supply chains, we've got all kinds of things, and when a decision is made on a change of government in the United States, that will certainly have an impact on how things go here, not to mention supply management, not to mention potential tariffs and those kind of things. I guess let's start with the top line of what you think will be the biggest impact of Trump 2.0, the second iteration of the Donald Trump government on Canada's food sector?
Well, the beauty of having Trump back into the White House is that we do have a sample of 4 years from 2016 to 2021. And if you remember, Dan, in 2016, everyone was panicking. I remember setting up a panel at Dalhousie on campus, and the title of the panel was "Trump, Now What?"
Right.
Like, if you remember, people were just, "Oh my God, this guy is going to be in charge of the free world. So how is that going to look like?" And so at the time, he was talking about tariffs, tearing apart the NAFTA deal, and everything else, similar to what we're seeing now. From 2016 to 2021, food inflation in Canada was barely an issue. In fact, when Trump took over from Obama, food inflation was at minus 4%. Do you remember that?
No, I don't.
Yeah. So basically, throughout 4 years, food inflation basically hovered around 1.5 to 2%, which is really a reasonable place to be. And of course, he did rip up NAFTA, and of course, everyone got nervous. Our supply management sectors got nervous. But when you look at the data, our exports to the U.S. are incredibly high. It's almost at $60 billion. So since the deal was ratified, our exports have gone up almost 57%. So that's both a curse and a blessing. The blessing is that we've gotten closer to the U.S. From a trade perspective. The curse is that we've gotten closer to the U.S.
Right?
Because we're more dependent, and Mr. Trump knows that. He knows that. And that's why I think the discussion around Bill 282, supply management, it is just noise in Canada because they're going to get their way. And so that's why we need to be ready.
Donald Trump, one of his main campaign planks, there was a lot of them, but one of the main campaign planks was to put a 10% tariff on everything.
Yeah.
What would a 10% tariff on Canadian food exports to the United States mean to the sector?
Well, first of all, I don't think it's going to happen. He's aiming at China. The aim is China, clearly. And frankly, he did say that in 2016. He never actually touched the food supply chain. And frankly, I think he sees Canada as a good place to go to get cheap ingredients for manufacturers in the U.S. And if there is one thing we know about Donald Trump, is that he's a stock-driven president. He wants the stock market to do well. And a lot of publicly traded companies are in the food sector. So he doesn't want to penalize companies, and he doesn't want to actually make Americans angry. Ms. Harris lost her election because of two reasons, immigration and the economy. People just didn't feel, even though the economy is doing very well in the United States, they didn't feel it was going well for them. And so I don't think that Trump would want to do that. And the other thing you need to keep in mind, Dan, what's different in the food sector versus other sectors, that margins are incredibly thin. A 10% slap at the border, it's going to show up at the grocery store eventually. And so I think there are going to be some tariffs on different products, but not on food, or not on soybeans, not on wheat or beef or pork. Our problem basically will remain likely China and India, because I think that Canada will be forced to pick. And that's the problem with the Trump administration, is that you're going to be forced to pick. You can't be friends with everyone.
Supply management. You and I have had plenty of discussions about that. Do you think that the push will continue to end supply, particularly in the dairy industry? We know we've been talking about bringing American milk and those kind of products across the border for a long time in bigger numbers. Yep. Do you think that that's going to happen or at least the push to happen under a Trump administration?
I'm of the mind that supply management will never end. Doesn't matter who's in the White House. I actually do think that not only supply management won't end, but it shouldn't end either. I think the core system needs to remain. We need some domestic production, because if you end the core system, especially in dairy, we're going to lose all of our farms. So I think Canadians, Nova Scotians right here, actually would want some domestic production, I think. So it's important to maintain the core system. Now, market access, that's going to change. I think that... So obviously, Bill 282, which
is to safeguard supply management during any future trade talks. That is irrelevant. It doesn't matter what Senate does in Ottawa. I actually testified 2 weeks ago against Bill 282 because I thought it was just bad news. It was a bad idea for even supply management sectors because it would make supply management an even greater target for Trump. He's going to say, rip down that law or else stay home, Ottawa. And you don't want that. My guess is that Trump will come in, will ask for more market access. It will erode supply management. It won't kill it, but we are likely going to end up compensating, quote unquote, farmers eventually yet again for the second time. That would be my guess.
Is the Canadian market, would it be that lucrative for American dairy producers to come across? Are we big enough?
I don't think so.
No,
it's just noise.
Right.
Listen, Donald Trump is a transactional president. He loves to make deals. He loves to make noise. I do think that his second presidency is going to be even worse than the first one. You'll have some guy called Elon Musk who owns X. He will probably make a lot of noise. He's already making noise around our own administration in Canada. I don't know if you saw yesterday, but he's heavily criticizing Prime Minister Trudeau already. And so I think there's going to be even more noise around trades and deals. But we shouldn't. We need to recognize that we need America more than they need us. And that's something. I mean, I'm in Texas next week. You hardly, if you listen to American news, you hardly hear the word Canada. And so we need to keep that in mind as much as possible.
Sylvain, you and I talk about food inflation a lot. I was talking about it with the Retail Council of Canada earlier today. That we know that that food inflation has been on the decline, at least statistically.
It's actually on its way up again. And actually on December 5th, and probably you and I will be talking on December 5th, we're releasing Canada's Food Price Report, our 15th edition. That's our forecast for the next 12 months. And it's a hard one. It's a hard one to predict. There are categories, food categories, that are going to be problematic in the new year, I would say.
When we've seen the declines over the recent months, many people that call this show say that they're not realizing it at the grocery store, not seeing a lot of it at the grocery store.
Yep.
Is that what, I don't want to prejudge your report, but is that kind of what you're seeing as well? Is that, yeah, we got some numbers that are saying one thing, but they're not realizing it at the grocery store, at least in Nova Scotia, because we know groceries are expensive here.
Yeah, no, and I get it because it's the legacy of food inflation. Prices don't go down. Salaries go up, costs go up. That's how inflation works, unfortunately. So that's why you want to maintain food inflation at about 2%.
Matches the
bad
salary.
news when you actually unpack the CPI right now, the food inflation CPI, that is, when you unpacked it, you realize that domestically driven categories are pushing prices higher. Dairy, meat, and vegetables in the fall. Those are the three categories that are actually making food prices higher. In other words, imports are saving us, but our dollar is going down. So, Dan, I think you're smart enough to understand what's going on here. And I don't think that the dollar will stop at 71 cents. It may actually drop even more.
And that was my next question is, we're seeing input costs drop a little bit. Why are the prices going up? And obviously it's that the almighty U.S. dollar, right?
Exactly. And so I'm a bit concerned about 2025, to be honest. I think that food prices were good for all of us in 2024, despite all the issues. I actually do think that the cost of living crisis we're in has a lot to do with mortgage payments, interest rates, and debt. And that's really has suffocated a lot of households out there. And so they're showing up at the grocery store with less money. And that's probably why they're not feeling that food prices.
That's what I hear is, we see the stats. You bring us the stats. Stats Can brings us the stats. Yeah. But at the end of the day, I'm still leaving the grocery store mad because it doesn't matter.
You don't
it costs me $100 every time I go to the grocery store, no matter what I'm buying.
Because everything is higher. I mean, in HRM right here, taxes are up, way up. So you have less to spend on food. That's basically what's going on here. I would love to tell you but we're seeing a brighter future for 2025. But right now, we're not seeing it. So anyway, I'll tell you more in December. It's every year is different. I mean, the Trump factor. I remember in 2016 when Trump got elected, we had no idea how to deal with Trump, but now we know, and numbers are pretty good. Frankly, I don't think we should be concerned about the Trump administration. I think we should be more concerned about how Ottawa is not making our agri-food sector more competitive.
Sylvain, we're out of time. Always a pleasure, sir.
Take care.
He's the food professor, Sylvain Charlesbois. We're going to stop and take a break. When we come back, we'll throw open the telephone lines. The number 902-405-6000. The open hour is next. Welcome back to the Todd Veinotte Show. I'm Dan Alstrand. It's time now for the first open hour of the week. If you have something you want to talk about, this is your opportunity. 902-405-6000 is the number. That's 902-405-6000. There's plenty to talk about that's happened over the last few days. We have seen some new polling data that was released this morning. The latest number showing a significant lead for Tim Houston's PCs as we roll along in the election campaign. Only a couple of weeks left now. I worry that because that lead is so large that people are just becoming tuned out. And they're like, oh, whatever. It's going to win anyway. Which is, I think, contrary to what these campaigns should be like, right? And I, well versed in what I have to think about polls, and if any polling that we've done over the last month has been any indication, I'm talking about the New Brunswick election, the Saskatchewan election, and even the U.S. election, maybe not as accurate as it should be. That being said, a pretty significant lead for the PCs right across the province. I'm curious your thoughts on that. If that is turning you off from the electoral process, are you going to perhaps not vote? 902-405-6000. That's 902-405-6000. I mentioned off the top of the show today that we had some pretty nasty weather conditions for Remembrance Day. And I know many of you didn't stop you, and more power to you for getting out there, putting on the rain slickers and umbrellas, even though it was too windy for an umbrella, and getting out there and showing your support and gratitude for Canada's veterans at a memorial service at Cenotaph across HRM and across Nova Scotia. I did say off the top of the show that there are a number of communities, my hometown back in Ontario, and in Moncton, more closer to here, where they have a service that is indoors for Remembrance Day. Now, not sure how it works in Moncton, but back home, the traditional services at our city's two cenotaphs continue on as normal. But they also have a third service inside the big hockey rink in the city, and it's very well attended. So my question to you is it should be something that we consider here in HRM, because November can be a plethora of weather conditions, right? And I know we've been standing out in front of that cenotaph since the cenotaph was erected, and it's always been the way that we've done it. But my question to you is do you think maybe we should consider moving a service inside for those of the seniors in our ranks and those older veterans that are out there to be able to participate? Because I know, speaking with a number of people over the last day or so, some just said that they just couldn't go out in that kind of weather. They're worried about getting sick or those kind of things. Your thoughts? Should we have an indoor service for Remembrance Day moving forward? 902-405-6000 is the number. 902-405-6000. Or our most recent interview with Sylvain Charlesbois just moments ago, suggesting that maybe the bloom is coming off the drop in food inflation rose suggesting that he's got a new survey coming out in a couple of days. At the beginning of a couple of days is December. Can you believe that? Anyway, early in December, where he thinks the numbers are going to show that food prices and food inflation is on the rise again, and blames it solely on the Canadian dollar. Is that something that concerns you? 902-405-6000. That or a bunch of other things that we can talk about. That's the beauty of Open Line Radio, and we'll go to the phones and we welcome Ryan to the show. Ryan, how are you?
Good. How are yourself today?
Good. What's on your mind today?
First, to quickly answer your question about the cenotaph, I say leave it up to the older veterans. If they're happy to do it outside, then I'm happy to do it outside. What's the saying? I know it applies to the post office. Wind, rain, sleet, and snow. War didn't stop, so they had to fight in any kind of condition. So I think standing out there in those kind of conditions shows our resolve to honoring them.
No, fair point. Just would be nice to have an option, wouldn't it?
Oh well, no, that's right, and that's why I'm saying leave it to the older veterans. If they don't want to do it outside in that weather, I'm not going to fight them on it. You guys want to be inside and comfy? Yeah, okay, it's your call entirely.
Fair points.
Now,
right?
That being said, what I really called about is the people who are voting for Premier Houston the second time. I'm going to need some people to call in and explain that one. Here you have a premier who, I'm not going to say he's failed to keep a single promise. He lied. Everything he said during the last election was a lie. I'm going to help make things more affordable. Where's the better paycheck guarantee? I'm going to help lower the cost of housing. Well, where's the tax on out-of-province homeowners? I'm going to make health care better. Well, there's double the amount of people on the wait list. And here's the kicker. Here's the one that gets me the most. And it's not even the fact that he broke his own law for the fixed election dates. It's the fact that here you have a conservative premier who traditionally conservative governments tend to be fiscally conservative. In the same time that he's had budget surpluses for the last 3 years, the provincial government has raised the third most of any province in Canada. So he gets budget surpluses, puts us farther into debt, the third most of any province in Canada since he's taken power, and he's fixed nothing. Every promise that he made was a lie. So how could anybody in their right mind decide that, yes, he's doing a good job, I'm voting for him again? I tried asking some people, some of my father's friends, and they're the older generation over this past weekend. They're all voting for him. Why? Well, because he's doing such a good job. Name one thing. And of course, they can't, because he's not done a thing. So please, somebody tell me why you're voting for this man again.
Ryan, appreciate the call, sir.
Have a good day.
902-405-6000. That's 902-405-6000. Ryan makes some points. I don't know necessarily his numbers, and I'm not saying he's wrong, but I've not seen those numbers. That being said, it doesn't mean they don't exist. But the paycheck guarantee one is obvious. That one's 100% true. And we know that the very first piece of legislation that Tim Houston passed as premier was a fixed election date. If you remember back, I think it was, 2 days before the election call when the premier was sitting literally right across from me in this studio. And he said that he was watching, I think was the term he used, the winds when it came to the election. And he said that he had to think long and hard because that piece of legislation, I think the words he used was my word. Well, he broke his word. And he called an election before the fixed election date. Does that change your opinion of the premier? I know it has for some. 902-405-6000. That's 902-405-6000. We're going to take a break. Back to the phones on the other side. You're listening to the Todd Veinotte Show. The open hour continues in minutes. Welcome back to the Todd Veinotte Show. Telephone number is 902-405-6000. That's 902-405-6000. Your chance to talk about whatever it is you'd like to talk about. Getting some responses to my question about Remembrance Day and if it would be a smart thing to offer a service inside instead of outside. Ken writing, I agree with 100% with what Ryan, our first caller's comments were on letting the veterans decide. He said they fought under harsh conditions. If people can't stand out in the rain and wind for 15 minutes in respect for all that these vets did for us, then perhaps they should stay home and watch it on CBC 10 TV. That's from Ken. And very quickly, before we go back to the telephone lines, some breaking news that is just rolling its way in now. The federal government is intervening in the port strikes in Vancouver and in Ottawa. Labour Minister Stephen McKinnon says he will intervene. He says negotiations have reached an impasse, and he's directing the Canada Industrial Relations Board to order the resumption of all operations at the ports and to move the talks to binding arbitration. So this, keeping part and parcel with what the Trudeau government has done with these labor negotiations that are impacting supply lines. We saw it with the CNCP or CN Rail, CPKC strike earlier this year. We now see it with the port strike at Vancouver and at Montreal. And not that I'm prejudging anything or maybe looking into a crystal ball, but I wonder if Cup W is looking at this, wondering if they're going to lose their ability to strike if the federal government deems it to be one of these services that we just can't live without. Anyway, the news is both Vancouver and Montreal, the federal government is moving to end the port strikes there. Let's pop back to the phone lines and welcome Bob to the program. Bob, how are you?
Bob's good. How are you?
Dan's good too. How are you?
Great. Listen, Dan, to go back to last week with the incident at the school here in Sackville.
Mm-hmm.
I get the news from you people every day, and you people showed a picture of Legion members where they said they didn't want armed forces members to wear their uniform.
Okay.
And your news release showed a picture of Legion members.
Okay.
I would think in your files, if you're going to talk about the armed forces, you should have a picture that you could publish to go along with your story, rather than a picture that has nothing to do with your story.
Legion members, not military members?
Not all.
Not all, but I didn't see the picture. Did they not have medals on?
I'd say the majority of them aren't anymore.
Well, Bob, I'll take it up to the chain and raise your concerns. Your thoughts on Remembrance Day?
Very good. We had out here in Sackville. We had well over 300 at the Sackville Legion and over 200 down at the Cenotaph.
Good turnout.
Very good turnout. Thank you.
Bob, appreciate the call.
All right. Bye now for now, Dan.
902-405-6000. That's 902-405-6000 is the number. Seeing what your thoughts are. Not suggesting either way. Just offering an opinion on perhaps offering an inside service. If you had 300 people in Sackville, 200 at the other Cenotaph, I know there was many hundreds down at Grand Parade. But what do you think the turnout would be if it was at Scotiabank? Just saying. 902-405-6000. Nathaniel, how are you?
I'm doing well. Yourself?
I am well. What's on your mind?
So the advanced polling, or whatever they call the one right now.
Early voting, yeah.
I called the call center.
Okay.
Concerning the e-ballot, or whatever they call it.
Yep.
And I asked the lady, the call center is located in Newfoundland.
Okay.
And I asked the lady, I said, what's the process? I said, once I go to the place I'm to vote at, mm-hmm. and you've identified me, what's the process? She goes, I don't know how it works. So, I can understand that they ditched out this to a call center because they don't want the election Nova Scotia workers in the office answering phones and whatever the case would be. I tell 8 o'clock at night, God forbid a government worker be getting off, having to do shorter hours than us working saps. But they should know the process. If they don't want to tell them the process because it's too lengthy, then at least have some way that I can go to Elections Nova Scotia and they say, this is how the e-ballots work.
Well, Nathaniel, that's an interesting point, and they probably should have told you how they work. I can tell you how they work.
Well, yeah, okay. So I go there.
Yep.
Assuming I'll go there, and I go, "Hi, Dan. This is Nathaniel," and et cetera, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Anyway, I have to go because my wife's just coming over her doctor's appointment, and I have to go on the road and drive.
Nathaniel, appreciate the call. Have a good one.
No problem. You too, bye.
902-405-6000, 902-405-6000. For those that have the same question, Nathaniel, my understanding is you go to a polling site and they identify you and they do all that process, and then you are handed a secure tablet, which is like an iPad, for lack of a better term. You'll go behind a curtain or behind a screen, and you'll tap the tablet with your vote, and then there's a receipt that's printed out, and that receipt, I believe, is put into the box as a reconciliation, and your vote is recorded digitally, stored in a secure server, and will be counted on election night. That's what Naomi Shelton has told me. I have not voted yet, so I can't say for sure because I haven't done it yet, but I'm going to do that this week. Back to the phones. Bernie, how are you?
The very best. How about you?
I haven't heard that for a long time, Bernie.
Yes, and actually I say it to honor him.
Me too.
I really miss Tom Young.
Yeah, Tom was a mentor of mine, and I think about him a lot, just like I think about Rick.
Yeah, I do. Well, I'm just going to call about the possibility of taking your Remembrance Day ceremonies and put them in the Scotiabank Centre.
Yep.
I'm from just outside of St. John.
Okay.
And we do have an inside one at the Harbour Station, TD Harbour Station.
Yep.
And it's quite full. Like, we went there one year, my wife and I, and it was, I'd say, three-quarter capacity. Now, that was 1 year. Since that, we've been going to the outside cenotaphs, no matter what the weather. And, well, yesterday, I was in Rossay at the Commons, and there was a good 200 to 300 people on the Commons.
Mm-hmm.
And with all that wind, all that rain, and yet there was still almost a full house at Harbour Station. I've talked to a few friends of mine, and they tell me that the other cenotaphs were just as busy as the one that we were at. I don't think it's going to matter what the weather holds or what.
Bernie, I think you hit one of those dead zones. I've lost you.
Really are.
You still there?
Oh, yes, I am.
I lost you for a second there, Bernie. Appreciate it. Yeah, I got you now.
Yeah, no, like I say, I don't think it's going to make a whole hill of beans as to what people think about putting it indoors. If they're going to go to the cenotaphs, they're going to go, and they're going to go in big numbers.
Great point, Bernie. Appreciate the call.
Have a great day.
902-405-6000. Let's go back to the phones. We welcome Tim to the show. Tim, how are you? Tim, are you there?
Is that supposed to be Ken?
Maybe you're Ken. Sorry, Ken.
No, that's okay. It gets mixed up quite a bit. No, we went out to Sackville, and the cenotaph was shut down, so they were directing everybody to the Legion. We got to the Legion, and it was full.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you're going to do an inside, do it at the Forum or do it at Scotiabank Centre or do something like that. But don't do it at the Legion. The Legion is too small, and you're now cutting off, 2/3 of the people that would have went to the cenotaph or whatever.
Well, that makes sense, Tim.
In all my time that I've been, when I was in the military and since I got out of the military, I've never, ever gone to an inside Remembrance Day ceremony. It's always been outside. It doesn't matter if it's rain, it's snowing, there's a hurricane on the go. Everybody goes to the cenotaph, and there's no. You can bring your umbrellas. You can dress up in your skadooshus, whatever you want to stay warm, right? There's no restrictions on anything like that, so you can stay warm. That's not a problem, right? The problem is going to a smaller venue like the Legion, and people not being able to get in to actually do the ceremony.
Ken, appreciate the call.
Thank you.
902-405-6000. That's 902-405-6000. My hometown, as I mentioned at the beginning of the open hour here before we take the break, has two cenotaphs, has always had two cenotaphs. They decided to also open up the hockey rink and have a service in addition to the other two. They didn't replace anything. They just gave people another option. I'm curious your thoughts. Is that something that we should do here in HRM? 902-405-6000 is the number. We're back after the news. Welcome back to the Todd Veinotte Show. I'm Dan Alstrand. Our telephone number is 902-405-6000. A couple of lines open if you want to get on. Again, 902-405-6000. Lots of things to talk about. Got some emails during the break. This one says, Dan, if we have a big ceremony for HRM at Scotiabank Centre, I guess the intent would be for everyone who doesn't live on the peninsula to park at a park and ride park and ride place and ride their bicycles into the downtown. I'm an elderly veteran and I want the ceremonies to continue to be held by legions in local communities. This is the one thing that we want the bureaucrats in Halifax to keep their hands off. A bit of rain and wind won't kill anyone. That is from David. 902-405-6000 is the number. We go back to the phones. We welcome Sydney to the show. Sydney, how are you?
All right. How are you doing today?
I am well. What's on your mind?
I have gone through the advance poll of voting, and here's what it happens: is you show your identification. The returning office looks up your district where you're belonging to. They produce paper, print off paper, and it has a QR code to it.
Okay.
Then you go behind what would normally be a polling booth.
Yep.
And there is a tablet there. You scan the QR code. It produces, calls up your district for who's running in your area.
Mm-hmm.
You can either use your finger or stylus, and for who you're voting for.
Okay.
And then you confirm that this is who you want to vote for.
Okay.
And then it prints off your ballot that you would normally get at the polling station on election day. And it is put into an envelope. You take it over to another person, and they actually put it in. They'll seal it and put it in a box.
Okay.
So actually, the electronic part is it's calling up your thing. All the advanced voting is going to have to be counted. It is not being. I don't know if it's being tabulated by the tablets, but you're putting your ballot in an advanced polling box. So it doesn't. To me, yes, it's not, they're not printing everybody's. Yes, it's calling up your people in your own district, but it isn't counting them, from what I can tell.
Sydney, I appreciate the call. 902-405-6000 from the conversations, more than one, that we've had with Naomi at Elections Nova Scotia, Naomi Shelton. The tablet, the QR code is correct. The tablet is correct. When you touch the tablet and then you confirm the tablet, that is your vote. That's going into a server. And that piece of paper that you're putting into the envelope, as Sydney described, in putting into the box, is how they reconcile the votes so that nothing nefarious happens if the numbers don't match. Do you understand what I mean? It's the votes will match the paper ballots. It's a way to double check things. But that digital X that you're making on a box is being stored in a secure server, and those will be the ballots or the votes that are counted on election night. Now, I know Naomi's listening, and if I'm wrong, she can certainly call in and correct me, but that's the way that it was described to me. 902-405-6000. Let's welcome Joe to the program. Joe, how are you?
Good. I just want to talk about my experience when I called in to find out how to vote.
Sure.
I called the number and asked them how to vote, and I confirmed that there wasn't going to be a mail-out, and I knew that anyway, but the person knew that. Mm-hmm. And I said, how do I use for ID. They said you can use your driver's license, or if you don't have that, there's some kind of form there you can fill out in order to vote. And then I asked for the locations. They gave me the 3 different locations in my district when I could vote, and the dates I could vote at those locations, including on the actual day, which is only when there was 3 places beforehand, but only 1 on the day of.
Yes.
And I asked for the candidates in my district. So it was all really positive. The only question they couldn't answer, I said, am I on the voting list? And she said, well, I don't have access to that, but I'll give you the number for the returning officer. And I called them and confirmed, yes, I was on the voting list.
So it was pretty easy, is what you're saying, Joe.
Yeah, it was all straightforward and very clear, and they knew their information. I have a question, though.
Sure.
On Remembrance Day. So there was a big controversy, Fox Sports, that when they did their Sunday football games at the military base in San Diego.
Uh-huh.
I guess Michael Strahan, and he's a child of a military father, he didn't hold his hands right. He put his hands like behind his back or something, and he didn't put his hand over his heart. And there was a big controversy about that. And now, what's the correct thing? If I go to a cemetery, I'm not military, and the people salute and everything, what am I supposed to do with my hands? Is there something I'm supposed to do?
The hand on the heart thing is very American in my understanding. I always just, for me, when I am former military, whenever I'm at a cenotaph, I just stand at attention and those kind of things. But the hand over the heart thing is very American.
Okay, yeah, I wasn't sure because I had never thought of it. I just sort of somebody stand at attention. Yeah, okay, but I didn't know if there was a correct or incorrect thing to do in Canada.
I don't know if it's incorrect. I mean, if you hold your hand over your heart, nobody's going to slap your hand down or anything like that. But I think that I come to attention. And when Canada's played, I stare directly at the Canadian flag, and that's my thing.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Appreciate it, Joe. 902-405-6000. That's 9. I didn't hear the controversy about Michael Strahan. On the Veterans Day is different down there than it is here. In Canada, Remembrance Day is a very solemn ceremony, right? And it should be. But that is Memorial Day for the United States. That's the day that they recognize their war dead. And I know that Memorial Day in the United States has turned into, it's a long weekend. It's the kickoff to summer, the car races, all that stuff. But November the 11th in the United States is Veterans Day, and that's the day that they celebrate their veterans. So it's a lot less solemn of a ceremony than we are used to here. I had the opportunity a few years ago, about 5 years ago, I was in London, UK, for their Remembrance Sunday service, and it was very similar to ours, very solemn, very as it should be, paying respects. But in the U.S., it's Veterans Day, and it's a different ball of wax. Need to stop down? No, we're going to take one more call, I'm told. So let's go to Robert. Robert, how are you?
Hey, Dan, how are you?
I'm good. What's on your mind?
Hey, I just, on the Remembrance Day thing, when you talk about the opportunity to, possibly host it in arenas and such things, I think why not have best of both worlds, right? Let people do what they need to do in their communities, and hopefully there's an opportunity to open up an arena. I mean, I look at it as more people the better getting out, right, to acknowledge these people of our past for us, right? So that's how I look at that one.
Works for me.
And with Mr. Premier Houston,
sure.
I think most of us can agree that politicians are pretty economical, Dan, with the truth a lot of the time. But
that's
Houston,
a polite way to. I've never heard it described as economical before.
They're very economical with the truth, right?
Fair.
All politicians, all parties. However, in my humble opinion, Mr. Houston, I hope you're listening, you flat out lied. That's my personal opinion, which is very different than being economical with the truth. So therefore, for that reason, Claudia gets my vote, and that's just because the Liberals need better candidates. So thanks for your time.
Appreciate it, man, and have a good day.
Thank you.
902-405-6000. That's 902-405-6000. I've never heard it described as economical with the truth before. Cheap with the truth. Maybe we need to put that on a T-shirt. We need to stop and take a break and listening to the Todd Veinotte Show. The open hour continues on the other side. Back in minutes. Welcome back to the Todd Veinotte Show. I'm Dan Alstrand. Our telephone number is 902-405-6000. Lots of open lines if you want to get a chance to get in. Lots to talk about. We've been discussing Remembrance Day. We've been talking about the latest polling numbers showing that Tim Houston is in a rather comfortable position in this election campaign. And I'm curious, and it may be something that we look at as we move through the campaign and into the post-election campaign. Should Premier Houston be successful in re-election, then interesting to see if the polls match what the result is, because as of late, as I've talked about on here many times, sometimes the polls and the result don't match. 902-405-6000 is the number. Let's welcome John to the program. John, how are you?
Not too bad. What I was trying to find out, Todd was going to try to find out, Jeff McClellan, I believe he's something to do with housing now?
He was, yeah. I don't know if he still is or not.
Well, they give him a temporary job, then they give him, then Premier Houston, his friend, he lost the election in the Liberal Party, and they and it's over 200,000, but nobody seems to know what he's doing for that money.
I don't even know if he's still there, to be honest.
Oh, he's still there. He's hidden in the closet with the 200. I mean, he's got a poor record. At one time, he had so many portfolios. He had Minister of Health and Safety, and when Klein opened the Donkin mine, the guy was interviewing him on the news and asked him, was he aware of the track record of Klein? He said, no. Did he expect it? No. Well, Klein, there's more people died in Klein's mine down the southern states. But, Todd was going to ask the Premier, what's he doing for this money? So you don't know anything about it.
No, I do remember Jeff McClellan was a Liberal cabinet minister, correct?
Yes, and he lost.
And then he was hired by the PC.
Yeah, he lost with a big paying job.
Interesting. John, I'll have to dig into that for you.
Okay, good enough.
Appreciate it. 902-405-6000 is the number, 902-405-6000. I'm not sure if Jeff McClellan's still there or not. I'll have to do some digging and see what I can turn up. Again, 902-405-6000 is the number. Let's welcome Gary to the program. Gary, how are you?
I'm good, Dan.
What's on your mind?
Well, Dan, I'm very concerned about what we can say and can't say in this country when it comes to immigrants. The immigrants, they come over to this country and we can't say this, we can't say that. I mean, I got really mad when I heard this girl on the radio there last week saying in her district they couldn't sing God Save the Queen or King. And this is our traditions in this country. It's not their country, it's our country. And if they don't like our traditions when they come over here, then they shouldn't be here.
Appreciate the call, Gary. 902-405-6000. It's 902-405-6000. That God Save the King thing, I don't know if that was a caller that was on the debate over the Remembrance Day uniform issue in Sackville or not, but I had not heard that prior to that. So if anybody else can clarify that, then please give us a call. As for painting all immigrants with the same brush, my response is going to be like every single time you do that, is that I think that you're wrong. We cannot paint an entire group of people on the actions of some. And that doesn't matter if you're an immigrant, if you're a 9th-generation Nova Scotian, whatever. Right? It's not fair. It's just not fair. We all were an immigrant at one point. I've been an immigrant to Nova Scotia twice. My father landed here as an immigrant, and then I moved here from Ontario. So that makes me an immigrant too. Cross-border migration is different than the immigration, but it's the same thing, correct? So are you painting me with that same brush too? I just don't think that that's fair. 902-405-6000. Let's get to the phones and welcome Terry to the program. Terry, how are you?
Fine, thank you. How about you?
I am well. What's on your mind?
Well, I was just going to go on, health care. Well, they're spending like $125 million on the province nurses, and they pushed in how many hundreds of millions of dollars into the health care for doctors and that, and nothing has improved. It all went down. Why can't they take that $125 million, and if they went and hired nurse practitioners to go in to the hospital, if I'm not sure, but probably a whole lot of people don't go to the emergency room all the time. But when they go in there and they're complaining about, oh, there's so many people in here, most of them are kids, people with colds, sore throat, ear infections, throat infections. And if they just had a nurse practitioner to look at them and she could diagnose their problem, well, then them kids wouldn't be having to go back out in this waiting room or whether there's another 20 people and spreading their colds and stuff. That would save a lot of money instead of having to wait there to see 4 or 5 doctors that are in the emergency room, I would think.
Terry, the concerns I have with that is that where do we get the nurse practitioner from, right? They're stretched as thin as the doctors are, right? A lot of those things that you described that are plugging up our emergency rooms can be handled at the pharmacy, right? The ear infections and the strep throats and those kind of things, yeah. and so that's something new that's happened over the last few years that we're able to get that stuff done. But just to blanketly say, well, just hire a bunch of nurse practitioners, I think that if we could, we would, right? It's where do we get them from?
Well, you got to educate them, like
right?
Yeah, you got to educate them. We got Canadians in here. They are Canadian citizens that are from foreign countries, but are now Canadian citizens. But they are doctors and all that. Well, they could go to their schools or colleges, whatever, and the doctors, they could work alongside of our doctors, and then they could say whether they're qualified or that, and then they can just go there. They don't have to go in there and start doing brain surgery or anything.
Terry, appreciate your call. Have a great day. Have a good one. 902-405-6000. It's 902-405-6000. And I just want to correct him very quickly, an assumption that all nurse practitioners are women. They're not. There are men in that field as well. It's part of the collaborative care model that we see in a couple of places. I know a couple of the leaders have said on this program that collaborative care is something that they want to work with. That's having a doctor and nurse practitioner and some registered nurses in a clinic so they can help to alleviate some of the pressure on the ER. I think that we have to think of outside the box and think about everything when it comes to trying to solve this problem, because I know there are many of you out there that probably have something that is wrong or is going wrong or maybe is a little off, and you're avoiding going to the emergency room because you know that you're going to be there for 15 or 16 hours. It's a massive problem, but it's not as easy as just saying, "Oh, just hire a bunch of nurse practitioners," because they have to go to school, and you can't just go down and have a job fair and say, "Hey, you're going to be a nurse practitioner," and off you go, and you can look at somebody's strep throat. I do think that the physician or the pharmacy thing is underutilized, and I think that that's because it's new, and I think it's something that we need to take more advantage of. These people already have training in these things, and they've had it for many, many years and have been unable to use it, and now they can. So if you have a small or nothing small, an ailment that is not life-threatening or requires a doctor, like the example of our last caller with a scratchy throat or an ear infection, then look at that. Just take a look to see if you can go to your physician or your pharmacist, because it's available now. Gary, how are you?
Not bad. I like to see the cemetery in the Scotia Bank or a big church or a big hall, because a lot of them veterans are veterans are in their 90s, you know, and Korean veterans are in their 80s and 90s. It'd be nice to have it in there.
So you think we should have an option for an inside service for Remembrance Day?
Yes, you know, because I do a lot of volunteer for the veterans. And this day a veteran in Second World War, he gave me 80-year pin this day from Normandy this day, because I volunteer a lot for the veterans.
Well, I appreciate that, Gary, and I appreciate your call.
Yep.
902-405-6000 is the number. I don't know if we have enough. Maybe Gary's the last word today. We're out of time. Vanessa's yelling at me in my ear. We will open up the telephone lines again tomorrow. Don't forget it's Wednesday, so the open hour moves to noon to accommodate Dr. John and house calls. So if you have a medical-related question, you can get those answered. I truly appreciate your passion. I really do, and thank you for the calls and thank you for the emails. We'll open up that line again tomorrow, and we will move forward. But we got to stop now for the news. On the other side of the newscast, Dr. Rob Thacker is here. It's time for Science Files. If you have a science question that's been bothering you, something you saw and wondered, how does that work? Well, here's an opportunity to get that answered. 902-405-6000 is the number. Science Files, after the news.
Facts.
Dr. Robert, you're a new and better man. He helps you to understand. He does everything he can. Dr. Robert, if you're down, he'll pick you up. Dr. Robert.
Welcome back. It's time for Science Files. I'm Dan Olstrand. He is Dr. Rob Thacker. And he's here for the next little while to answer your science-related questions. If you have something that maybe you read over the weekend or the last week, or maybe something that's been bothering you for some time, and you're like, how does that work? Well, here's a perfect opportunity. Now, Rob will say that he will do his very best to try to answer your questions.
Those are the best questions.
Right?
It's like, how's that? Why is that? That's where the really good questions start from.
How does that work?
Yeah.
Right? It's like the catch-all question in my business is, why?
Yep.
Right? And that's the best question you can answer. Anyway, I'm not trying to seed the calls here at all. 902-405-6000.
We're laughing already.
902-405-6000. I came across a headline in prepping for the show today. It was published yesterday on CNN that published something outside of the U.S. Election result, which is staggering. But anyway.
True.
It read this, and I'm probably guilty of what I've admonished some for doing and only reading the headline, but it says, alien-like signal from 2023 has been decoded. The next step is to figure out what it means. And they're referring to this signal that were picked up from outer space a couple years ago after the ExoMars Trace Gas Orbiter, which is a European Space Agency spacecraft that's orbiting Mars, getting a signal, they're calling it, and I'm putting quotes around it, an alien-like message back in May of 2023. Dr. Rob, we've talked about this a few times on the program, but I'm curious as to your thoughts, if or what this is, and
honestly, I have no idea, because you kind of sprung this right on me.
I do this to Rob all the time, and it's just,
I'm like,
it's part of my
I
thing.
haven't heard anything, so,
yeah.
I mean, honestly, an ExoMars, I mean, how is that involved? I mean, if that's not going to be something that's detecting alien signals, because it's just not set up to do that. Right?
What it is, here's the description. It appears to be a cluster of white pixels on a black background, so I'm assuming this is a visual thing.
Mm-hmm.
The visualized message is of 5 configurations that represent amino acids, the building blocks of life. This is on CNN. I shouldn't laugh. The message is not static and is in motion and only displays the arrangement for about 1/10 of a second.
Okay. You're a journalist, so I'm going to say context is everything.
Yeah, it is.
Right. So, I mean, sometimes we talk about taking observations with craft and so on ahead of them doing their main observations. With this, I'm not so sure. I mean, if it's ExoMars sending something, I mean, I'm not entirely sure how that's really an alien signal. So I think I'd have to look at the story in more detail. Sorry, I would have to read it.
Solar surge, that's the thing that we've been dealing with over the last little bit here that's given us all those lovely aurora borealis. Borealis?
I've never heard anyone talk about it in plural before.
Anyway, the northern lights.
Auroras.
works. Apparently has ended the Binar space program satellite mission ahead of schedule. So
yeah, I can believe that.
Tell me a little bit about, Rob, what these solar flares, as they're called, what do they contain, and why are they dangerous to those missions that are up there?
Sure. So they will contain lots of charged particles coming off the sun. The sun is a giant ball of plasma, basically, and plasma is like this state of matter where people remember from school, electrons and the nuclei are positively charged, the electrons are negatively charged. So when you have something that's really, really hot and those things are stripped apart, you can send all of these charged particles in the solar wind towards the Earth. And now, so this is electrical charge, right? And so when it shows up at the Earth and gets diverted down the magnetic field lines, it does a sort of like cyclical spiral down them. Then very often it will come into contact with spacecraft and will build up a charge on the spacecraft. And it's actually very difficult for those spacecraft to get rid of that charge sometimes.
It's not like they can drag a ground line into the ground,
No,
right?
they can't. And so they have to be protected against this. And it is one of the issues that you can get arcing on spacecraft as well. You can actually get arcing on buildings sometimes, too. That happens down on Earth as well. But
St. Elmo's fire.
Yeah, for sure. So this is one of those things that you have to design for, and you have to be able to release this charge in one way or another, or at least store it somewhere and hope that over time it just leaks away. Because it is going to actually leak away the same way static electricity leaks away over a period of time. And so in this particular case, I suspect very much what's happened is that there was an overload of charge on the satellite and that it was simply not able to deal with it. And that's caused a significant problem in one particular system or another. It could be many different things. Could be the radio transmitter, could be all sorts of different things on the electronics on board. And so that's probably what's done it, would be my guess. I mean, we have lost satellites due to space weather before.
So a place like, let's say, the International Space Station that is up in space is large.
Yep.
And is up there for a very long time. How does it store this kind of static electricity?
So the ISS is really quite large, and the bigger you get, the less likely you are to be able to develop a really significant charge. It just doesn't kind of work that way. The bigger things are, the more likely they are to be electrically neutral. Right, and so the ISS really is very big, comparatively speaking, the size of a football field. It's still going to have some issues with some parts of it, and there will be all sorts of systems for diverting and moving the current around, I'm sure. But it's not something I've ever heard taken as seriously as protecting smaller satellites. For smaller satellites, it really is a huge issue.
So they would create a bank for this energy and hope that it degrades over time?
Well, as far as I know, you hope that it degrades over time. That's as far as I know. I mean, I should say I'm not an expert on this. I just know a tiny little bit about it. So,
but it's these solar winds and these solar plumes that come out of the sun, I would imagine, give those that are responsible for maintaining the satellites all kinds of fits.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that was the Attic panic and so on way back in the 80s when they lost the Attic satellite. So yes, you do have to be careful. Like, one of the best things you can do is put it into a standby mode, so you reduce all of the overall currents that are surging around. And that means if something does build up and you get some kind of current inducted, then it's not on top of everything else that's happening, right? And that's one of the ways that you can you can protect as best as possible. But it's the same thing for power line systems on the Earth.
That was my next question, right? Is that, there's the doomsday scenario is that we get a solar flare strong enough that it will make its way to Earth and essentially fry the power lines. Is it, I guess, possible? Is that theoretically possible?
It's still a concern, and there's a lot of work done on protecting power lines, building capacitor banks to absorb sudden charges, disconnects as well, because if you can break things up, then you're literally shortening the length that you can induct the charge over, and that's really important to be able to do that as well. There's a lot of research done on this. I think we're in a lot better place than we were in, say, the 80s, partly because of what happened with losing the Quebec power grid, for example, in the 80s. But I do have some concerns for the future as we build more and more power infrastructure because of net zero. So we're going to have to be very thoughtful about how we put all of those systems together and make sure there are disconnects and places to absorb the power and so on.
It's not like you can put a big shield up in space and deflect it, right? It's going to come through anyway.
Well, to a certain extent, that's happening anyway, right? Because the Earth's magnetic field is diverting some of the charge to the poles, so we're protected from that perspective. If it just came down all over the shop, I think we'd see a lot more problems than we actually do. Although there is a concentration factor, I suppose, at the poles. It's just fortunate there's not too much up there or down there.
So now that this flare's done, right, and was responsible for those beautiful skies that we saw, is there a way to predict the next? Do we know when the next one's coming?
There's a Nobel Prize waiting for you if you can do that. So it's really difficult, and it's a little bit like volcanology, that there are signals that you can see within the system, like buildup of sunspots and things like that. So you can expect there to be more activity when you can see a lot of sunspots, but there's no guarantee you're going to get a big flare as a result. Those things tend to be sort of boiling up from the interior, and so they're not as easy to really predict as we would like it.
How much notice do we get? Because, it takes time for that to travel here, right?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. I mean, for the very fastest material, it's literally 90 minutes, 2 hours. So particularly, we saw the impact of that on Mars when they suddenly got an impact of space weather that they weren't expecting to get for a few hours, and they got it within a couple of hours. So sometimes things maintain very, very close to the speed of light. And then for the more heavier stuff, generally we say up to like a couple of days. Generally, most of the time people will say, let's expect it'll be here in a couple of days. That's normally the usual timeline.
902-405-6000, a couple on the lines. There's a couple open lines if you'd like to get your question answered. We're going to take our first break on Science Files. He's Dr. Rob Thacker. I'm Dan Alstrand. We're back in minutes. All right, welcome back. This is Science Files. He's Dr. Rob Thacker. I'm Dan Alstrand. Dr. Rob here to answer your science-related questions for the next little while. 902-405-6000 is the number. If you have a science-related question, something you can perhaps enlist the wealth of knowledge that Dr. Rob has, this is your opportunity. He's still mad at me for dropping the alien thing on him. Anyway, 902-405-6000.
Okay, so now we tell everyone what the answer to that was. It was alien-like. Not alien, okay?
902.
Oh, you got me. Well done.
See, I wait all week for that. 902-405-6000. Let's welcome Patrick to the program. Patrick, how are you?
Good. How are you two gentlemen?
Good. Your question for Dr. Rob, please.
Okay. First off, I do have a comment on the signal story. I read that story as well. It was on CTV News website. Apparently, it was decoded by civilian scientists, a father-daughter team, and it looks like it's a series of pixels that represent amino acids.
Okay. So they're trying to encode something about life in it. Yeah. So, sorry, you said civilian. Did you mean citizen scientists?
Or citizen scientists.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
got it. Because there's a lot of civilian scientists out there.
Yeah. No, sorry. Yeah.
Your question on black holes.
My question is on black holes. I saw a very nice story on them, or show on them recently, this weekend, and it was talking about how a black hole emits on an axis beams of energy sometimes.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I was just curious because it was kind of a cursory mention in the story, but how's that all work? Why did they do this?
So I'm a little bit concerned because you've taken something that's actually a property of the accretion disk around the black hole. That's the thing that's going to be emitting. And so when stuff is falling into the black hole, you can imagine there's a lot of things getting crushed, rubbing up against one another. And, if you rub your hand on your pants, your hand gets warm and it's friction. So there's going to be friction going on in the accretion disk around the black hole because everything is spinning. It's just going to go into one preferred direction. And then over time, you can actually have such a huge buildup of energy. This thing gets really, really hot, right? And when it gets really, really hot, then a few possibilities can happen. There can be the release of a really, really strong wind in a certain direction. And as well as on top of that, you can have what's called magnetic reconnection around the black hole, which will release a sudden jet of material going upwards. And those things will go ludicrous distances, further distance than outside of the galaxy sometimes, right? And so those processes are well documented and well observed throughout the universe, to be honest. And it's one of those things that actually, as galaxies get bigger, the black hole activity, like those jets or winds, have a more significant impact on the galaxy. Right? That's really a significant change.
the supergiant black hole at the center of our galaxy, is it doing this, or like what's going on there?
So it probably had a period of activity a few million years ago, but it's not of a big enough size to have a really, really massive impact on all of the material all of the material. I should say, generally it impacts the gas in the galaxy. The stuff that's already formed into stars is very dense and it's difficult to do much with that. But the gas between the stars that collapses over time to form new stars, that can literally be blown out of a galaxy if the black hole winds are strong enough. Right, but for our particular supermassive black hole, it's fairly quiet, fairly quiescent right now. And we think in general it probably goes through periods of activity of maybe a couple of million years before shutting off for a few tens of millions of years.
Okay.
Thanks, Patrick.
Cool.
Have a good one. 902-405-6000 is the number, 902-405-6000. And remember, everybody, black holes
don't suck.
They crush. So, following up on that, if it creates enough friction, enough heat.
Well, it is heat, actually.
Well, that's what friction is. It's the byproduct, right?
Yeah.
But does that change the hole at all? If it gets really, really hot in there, does it make it bigger? Does it make it smaller? Or does it matter?
So only in the sense that as the material is falling into the black hole and going through its so-called event horizon, that's the point of no return, light can't escape beyond that. That's generally, it's adding mass to the black hole. So the black hole is getting bigger and the event horizon will get bigger over time as it accretes material. But the only thing that you can have in a black hole that is physically descriptive of its nature is its mass, its spin, and its charge, right? Those are the only three things that actually describe a black hole, right? And so over time, material falling in will increase the spin, will increase the mass, and in general, because we talked about large objects tending towards electrical neutrality, in general, we don't worry too much about charge because we think that black holes are so big in general, they'll be electrically neutral, right, by and large. And so we don't tend to worry about that, but they will add spin and it will add mass.
How does something falling into a black star, not getting sucked up by a black star, but falling into a black star increase its spin?
How does something? Because you have to conserve the angular momentum, right? You can't suddenly destroy the angular momentum. So as stuff passes into the black hole, then that black hole has to be absorbing the angular momentum. Although precisely how that happens is really very difficult problem in general relativity.
So the more that falls in it, the quicker it spins?
Yep.
I didn't even...
And so you also get spins spinning up when you have two black holes merging. That will actually produce a significant change in the spin as well. So it can go the other way sometimes. That if you have things that are anti-aligned merge their spins, they can actually spin down, but that's really rare. Most of the time, they tend to spin up.
And is it clockwise, counterclockwise, or does it vary?
It's all over shop, right? I mean, there will be a tendency for the black hole to be somewhat aligned with the rest of the galaxy, because as you can imagine, stuff that's falling in has to come from somewhere, and so most of it's going to come from the outer parts of the galaxy, which for a spiral galaxy is going to be actually in the plane, right? But for something like an elliptical galaxy, then things are all squiggly piggly all over the shop. Yep.
Squiggly piggly.
Yeah.
902-405-6000. Let's welcome Ryan to the program. Ryan, how are you?
Good. Well, first I was going to comment on that story about the simulated alien signal.
Okay.
I'm assuming Dr. Rod read the story already.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Well, you nailed it. Simulated alien signal. That was what was getting me. Yeah.
Yeah, it's part of a Mars lander experiment.
Yeah.
Anyway, what I'm curious about is the degradation of objects in space. Specifically, we're talking about the ISS is going to be coming down sometime in the next few years. Here on Earth, of course, weather and temperature degrades a building or a car or whatever it is. What degrades a space station, and what specifically would be wrong with the ISS or its individual modules that would have to be deorbited?
Sure. So over a period of time, one of the key things is micrometeorite impacts, right? And so these things happen on a fairly regular basis, and the only thing you can do is really armor things, but that armor eventually starts to get degraded as well. So that's going to be one of the key things. On top of that, you're going to have a bit of radiation exposure. Let's not forget about that. I mean, that's going to be something that is going to have an impact on systems over time, particularly chips, for example, right? Because any kind of computer chip is to a certain extent impacted by radiation. And in fact, one of the key things with space travel is we tend to use chips that are protected as best we can, radiation hardened as they're called. But even so, over a period of time, those systems will get degraded too. So really, it's not a pristine environment. It's a pretty harsh environment in general up in space. So even though it is a vacuum, there's still material flying around in it. There's radiation flying around in it. And there's a lot of sun exposure as well. So if you have stuff that's... I'm not going to joke about, well, things are going to fade, but long term...
Need a new paint job.
Yeah, long term, things are going to be impacted by that constant exposure as well.
Ryan, I appreciate the call. We need to take a break. Science Files continues on the other side. You're listening to 95.7 News Radio. We're back in minutes. Welcome back. Dan Olstrand here with you. This is Science Files. He is Dr. Rob Thacker from St. Mary's University. If you have a science-related question, great opportunity. Telephone lines are wide open for you to get your call in quick and get your question answered and maybe put some of those concerns to rest. Anyway,
because otherwise you're going to have to listen to Dan and I.
And it's, yeah. Anyway, we'll leave that as it is. Dr. Rob, we've talked about it in the past. And I know that there's a lot of interest in Beetlejuice, and we're not talking about the movie. We're talking about the big rock
star, yeah.
Or the star. Tell me what the latest is that you know about Mr. Beetlejuice.
Yeah, so Betelgeuse is a really bright star in Orion. So we can see it in the winter. And it's a red giant star. It's actually, as stars go, fairly young. Like it's about 10 million years or so old. But stars have this habit of the bigger they are, the faster they burn out, right? And so the very biggest stars are the fastest ones to burn out. I mean, that really, really massive stars, like 80 times the mass of the sun, they burn out in like a million years, right? So Betelgeuse is about 10 million years old, but it's going through this weird kind of stage where it's blown up into a red giant phase. And if you look at what's happening with its surface, there's a lot of pulsations that seem to be going on, or at least different amounts of luminosity on the surface. Could be different clouds of carbon, things like that, all sorts of in the atmosphere of Betelgeuse itself. And so the reason why people are really interested in this is we think that before any of these big stars go supernovae, there will be an event at which things start to go dimmer. And so Betelgeuse started going dimmer for some time, but it's come back again, right? And so this has nonetheless got everyone, is it going to go up? Is it going to go up? And the answer is no, it hasn't gone up. There's always this outside chance that it's already gone up and we don't know it because it's 400 odd light years away, 600 light years away. But at the end of the day, this is something that we're watching very carefully, because if it does go off, then it's literally going to be visible during the day. It's going to be that bright. So this is something that, nonetheless, I think I've joked about this before. If it did happen, as exciting, as amazing as it would be to have this daytime star that we can see, it would drive my colleagues who study distant galaxies absolutely crazy, because this would actually light up the sky at night, right, with lots of additional light that would really make it difficult to see very, very faint things. And so literally we would have a period of probably about 2 years waiting for it to get dimmer, during which it was just really difficult to do lots of ground-based deep sky observing.
So when this thing goes supernova, we'll be able to see it on Earth, but it'll just look like a regular star to us, to the naked eye?
It will look like a really super bright star. Yeah. So, I mean, I probably guessing around the brightness of Venus or something like that. So if you see that in the afternoon twilight, you know how bright that is. And so there have been examples of supernovae that are visible during the day within the last sort of like few hundred years, but we're kind of overdue for one, to be honest, in the galaxy. Yeah.
So do we have to say its name 3 times? Is that, and then it goes supernova?
I've tried, doesn't work.
902-405-6000. We welcome Dave to the program. Dave, how are you?
Very good, thank you. Thanks for taking my call. A couple questions to Rob, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Both completely different. But my first question is, we are in a record-setting solar maximum, if I'm not mistaken. We've seen that with the Aurora.
It's certainly been impressive with the Aurora, absolutely.
Yeah, which is from the solar maximum, and I think we're still in that. My question to you, we are also evidently have a record number of volcanic activity on the planet at the moment. I think 69 of them that we know of. That's above ground. I don't know what's below the ocean.
Well,
obviously.
actually, that's one of the really difficult things for us to determine because we don't have a good way of tracking what's happening below the surface.
Exactly. I mean, unless there's a tsunami there are some indications that there is some, but we all know that there's a lot of vents and things at the bottom of the ocean.
Sure.
We've only explored our oceans, 98%? We have not explored, or maybe even higher than that. So,
well, we're doing a good job of mapping it, but it's a question of, is mapping as good as going down and getting a detailed look?
So that's question number one. You're not a volcanist, obviously. Could that, because there's a lot of magnetic tug, I would imagine, with solar flares, but with solar flares, and could that be creating some activity and pull on the Earth as well? So that's my first question. But don't hang up, and I'd like to hear that. I got another question for you, if you don't mind.
Sure. So I don't see an obvious way for aurora activity to impact volcanoes. I mean, we're looking at two very different mechanisms. You're looking at what's essentially a charged-based mechanism with magnetic fields versus something that's entirely driven by thermal pressure, right? So I can't honestly see a way that you can connect those two in an easy way. I mean, there is... things got stupid hot, but actually the Earth isn't hot enough to do that. If you had a separation of the charge in a plasma, then there would be some kind of interaction. But basically, molten rock is hot, but not that hot, right? So it's not something that I can see an obvious connection with. And you're asking about sort of like how the magnetic fields. The magnetic fields, they're going to interact. So we're going to have an interaction between the solar wind and the Earth's magnetic field. But the Earth's magnetic field is coming from way, way down, right, in the interior of the Earth. And it's by and large doing what it wants to do. I mean, there's an enormous amount of momentum down there, and it's going to carry on doing that. And so I can't honestly think of a way of connecting them. I would love to be able to just sort of like snap my fingers and say, but I don't really think they are because they're so different.
And we're also getting the poles are shifting, if I'm not mistaken, as well, right? I mean, I'm
so
not
the
trying
poles,
to create panic here, but I think, go ahead.
So with the poles shifting, there's a theory that there is a particular certain amount of mass down, very deep down in the Earth, that's actually shifting somewhat. I can't remember the precise name for it.
I think there's nickel in there, isn't it, in the middle of the...
Well, there will be nickel there, but there'll be a lot of other things in there as well. And so there is this idea that there is a particular mass that's moving around, and that's changing the magnetic configuration a bit, right? And so this is not entirely unexpected, right? But nonetheless, it's all part of what happens on the Earth over geological time.
Fascinating. A lot of things going on. One more question, if you don't mind, and this is going to be kind of a fun one. I'm just curious. Elon Musk sided with Trump, and obviously he went on Joe Rogan, and I think he was integral to a certain degree with young men because young men are distraught and lost, I think. I don't know. I'm not a young man anymore, but I kind of get that feeling. So I think having Elon on board the team, I will say, and let's face it, he is probably the smartest man on the planet that I know of and most accomplished. He's amazing. He can juggle 12 things at once. Now that he's in politics, Rob, what is your feeling about that? Because he took over X, of course, right, for freedom of speech, blah, blah, blah. He's very enterprising, and I'd just be curious, as the success as the Republicans go, because he was part of that team, obviously, and may continue to be. So, what is your feeling about a scientist that is...
So I'm going to say it's complicated, right? Because Musk is a contradiction. He really is. He's someone who... He's smart, don't get me wrong. But he's also very adept at seeing opportunities. And I think that's his superpower, if I'm really honest. I don't necessarily think he's the smartest person on the planet, but he is exceptional at seeing opportunities, right?
And I agree, and he's a business oriented. Obviously, you have to a certain degree, but he's also very dedicated. Remember, he slept in his Tesla factory when they were losing money. He didn't go home.
But I mean that's not going to save them really any money, is it? Come on, let's be honest.
Well, I don't know if money's all what he's after. I think.
Well, he doesn't need to worry about money, does he? Because he's worth 150 billion or whatever it is. So.
Well, you can lose that very quickly in a day.
All right, Dave, let him answer the question. All right, we need to get an Elon Musk debate.
So Musk is a complicated character. How is Elon appeal to young men a factor? Quite possibly, right? I know a lot of young men who think the world of him. Also know a lot of other young men who think he's a bit of a wally. But when you look at what he's done, you can't deny that he's done some exceptional things. And I always come back to SpaceX, right? Because SpaceX is essentially Elon Musk's vision. I'll give him that, absolutely. The engineers have made it happen, of course. But that is pretty impressive. Now, you compare that to Tesla. Tesla, I just don't get, right? Because it's going to be wiped out basically by BYD and Chinese manufacturers who've got a different way of doing things. And that's something that I really don't understand, because we're seeing Musk sort of saying we're pivoting to robo-taxis, and I get why they're doing that. I understand that. But at the end of the day, Tesla seems to be this company that has an incredible valuation, most of which is actually largely goodwill, right? And so I really struggle with that, right? I struggle to see the value. And that's not to say he hasn't done things with PayPal and so on. Yeah, absolutely. I'm not going to take anything away from him, but there's a number of things that you can question about him as well.
Right. Well, you can also see what he's done with Starlink, helping the hurricane victims down in Carolina, and also helping Ukraine. Starlink.
Well, and now he's looking at taking it away from Ukraine as well.
He's capable. But one more question: is he still on the agenda to rescue those astronauts that are still up there? God bless them.
No, that's all sorted out, right? So they're going to come down in the next Crew 9 departure.
So that doesn't have anything to do with Musk.
It will be on a SpaceX vehicle.
There you go. Okay, I'll rest my case. Cheers.
Thanks, Dave. 902-405-6000. That's 902-405-6000. I think that with Elon Musk, you're right. He's visionary.
Mm-hmm.
He certainly has challenged
the status quo
and the norm, and I think that that's good. But you also have to remember that he's a businessman and he likes to make money. So. And that's not a shot at Elon Musk. That is why everybody is in business, is to make money. Now, my question, and this isn't for you, Dr. Rob, this is for the Elon Musk supporters that are listening. If Elon is brought into cabinet, which there's a lot of speculation he'll be brought into Donald Trump's cabinet, does he have to put his companies into a blind trust? And would he want to do that?
I don't think he'd be capable of doing that. Because he's one of the problems.
He is X.
So one of the problems that many of the people who work at his company say, we actually literally built a way of dealing with him so we could get stuff done. Because he wants to know everything. And if you have people over your shoulders wanting to know everything, anyone who's dealt with, I won't call it micromanagement, but overt management, it's difficult to deal with. Right. And that's not to say sometimes it doesn't have an impact. It doesn't get things done better. But a lot of the time you end up dealing with reporting that's just wasting your time.
So with somebody that is a visionary, that has all these great ideas, that, it challenges the status quo for 4 years, if he's in cabinet or however long he stays in cabinet, if he has to walk away from his companies, I don't know if Elon Musk will do that.
I don't think he can. I really don't think I can. He truly loves doing business. He truly loves his companies. It's very clear. Right? That's one of the things, like this whole thing of him like building a data center that was supposed to take 4 years in 20 days. I mean, when you look at what actually happened, you're like, okay, that's a story. And yes, he did go and get his friends to go and move a whole bunch of boxes. But that's not what Elon Musk is famous for, right? That's just literally saying, I'm not going to take this from my group who say we have to do it this way. I'm just going to go out and do it. But literally anyone could have done that. Right? And it bothers me when people sort of say, oh, this is remarkable. I'm like, no, literally any group of server deployment people could have gone and done that. Right?
He does have the ability, and I'm sounding like I'm championing Elon Musk, but he does have the ability to inspire others.
You have to be balanced about all of his incredible achievements.
Yep.
Absolutely.
And he does have the ability to inspire people to challenge that norm and to to take things on. Anyway, we're digressing here. We're going to go back, moving back to science. This is Science Files. We're going to take our last break. We're back after the break. You're listening to the Todd Veinotte Show. I'm Dan Ahlstrand. Back in minutes.
Thanks. She wanted to be. She said, baby, can't you see? I want to be famous, a star of the screen.
Welcome back to Science Files. Dan Ahlstrand along with you. 902-405-6000 is the number. He is Dr. Rob Thacker from St. Mary's University. Sent me an article earlier this week, in fact, earlier this day, which is kind of appropriate considering who we were just discussing.
Yeah.
This from the BBC. It's an article about driverless trucks. We've been talking about these things for some time.
Yeah,
we've been talking about the move towards, and we're talking about like big trucks, right?
Oh, these are 300-ton trucks.
And even on a smaller scale, that is there a push to replace the 18-wheeler that we see of today with autonomous vehicles? I guess your thoughts on taking your hands off the wheel.
So let's put this in perspective. This is in Pilbara. Actually, my nephew works there, right? Which is kind of incredible coincidence, but there we go. And so this is in the Australian outback. It is extremely hot, extremely dry. It is not a nice place for humans to be in, right? And so all of the workers go there, and if they're just out during the day, they're like, you get drenched with sweat. It's very hot, very dusty, and difficult to work there. And so they fly people in, fly them out, and so on. It's not a nice place to be. And so what they've done is to basically get a whole bunch of Komatsu 300-ton trucks and then have them self-drive, right, using GPS. So it's not a safe environment, right? Anything that goes into the area as a vehicle has to have its own GPS tagging, so the systems know that it's there. And so this is something that's been done with, by and large, the support of the workers there. They've been pretty much on board on this. It's cost the company a lot of money to do it.
Is this like a mining company? Or?
It's a mining company, yeah. I should remember which one it is. I'm sorry, I don't. Rio Tinto, that's it. Yeah. Okay. So, and so they spent a lot of money on this, but the payback is that the productivity's gone up. Surprise, surprise. I mean, obviously a self-driving truck
doesn't take time off,
exactly,
doesn't take vacation, doesn't take sick days.
Exactly. And so that isn't anything that anyone's going to be surprised by. What is somewhat surprising to me is that their safety record has improved as well. Now you can say, oh, that's down to people getting tired and things like that. Yep, absolutely. But they now have a situation in which I think it's the influence...
Number one rule of radio.
Not me.
Number one rule of radio, Dan, turn off your phone. Oh, Vanessa's giving me that dirty look. Am I in trouble or what?
Not me. And so, no. Anyway, so no, complete. So yeah, the safety record. So with the safety record, I actually think that's largely down to the fact that once you have these giant things driving around, you have to be so careful with the environment that people are naturally more safety conscious because of this, right? And so I think that's had a knock-on effect on their safety record. And so right now, it's generally supported by the people who work there. The drivers have been retrained to do other things and so on. There's a lot of stuff that needs to get done on top of just driving things around. And so that's worked. But I think long term, because these drivers were paid quite a bit of money. Right? Seriously. And a lot of them were women as well. So that's something that we're seeing being taken out of the workforce. And they're saying, well, at the moment, we're just repurposing people and so on. But I'm thinking, well, down the line, there's not going to be the same number of jobs anymore. So even though you've been able to reassign people, I think at some point there's going to start to be concerns about robots taking jobs.
Now, we're seeing that in Canada with autonomous work being done at ports. In fact, it's part of the reason why we're seeing this strike in Vancouver and in Montreal, and we've seen some of the objection to that right here in Halifax. We tend to, things usually start with automation from the best of places. That in situations like you described, where we are. It's an inhospitable place to work for humans. It's hot. It's dusty. It's disgusting. But when companies see this kind of thing, then they tend to say, hey, maybe we can do that here. And is that the danger?
Yeah, and I think... So here's the challenge, right? At the end of the day, most people will sort of say, well, if you look at the history of automation, we generally change the nature of work over time, right? That's a reality. But now I think there's a lot of people who feel that their jobs don't have a whole lot of value in them, right? And that actually speaks back to a lot of the concerns with young men in particular, that the kind of jobs that we identified self-worth with 50, 60 years ago, right? Machining, things like that. I mean, there is still some of that going on, but not at the same level, right? And I think a lot of people struggle with that, aside from struggling to make ends meet. And so when we see automation come in, there will be people say, oh, things will change, we'll do other things. But you can actually see the fact that not everyone believes that, because we have this discussion about universal benefits, this idea which comes largely pushed by Silicon Valley people that, you know, we're going to be able to pretty much mechanize and digitize things to the point where there aren't going to be many things left for people to do, and that's going to mean they're going to need something other than work. And that's not something our society is in any way, shape, or form ready for, in my opinion, right? We've built an identity. We can argue about the Protestant work ethic and so on, and that's its influence on the development of our society. But it's a huge, huge issue, right? If we have robotics reach the point where we can do all of these things without human intervention.
And very quickly, Rob, we're just about out of time. A Chinese rover finding some evidence now of an ocean on Mars.
More evidence, yeah. I just wanted to point out that there's more than US rovers on Mars. And so the Zhurong rover, which was touched down in 2021, has found evidence for kind of like the water's edge, as it were. So it's not sort of like big erosion features. People may remember there is very well-known images of things that literally look like river deltas on the surface of Mars. This is much more small-scale, sort of like small-scale erosion features, even things that kind of look a little bit like what we would have from mud volcanoes when they sort of solidify and so on. But I thought it was interesting just because it's looking at the problem from an entirely different scale compared to orbit. And so this is something that I think there's now a really kind of lot of evidence for water on the surface of Mars billions of years ago.
With all of the data that we're getting from the from the Chinese rovers, the American rovers,
yep.
It's almost inevitable now that we're going to find at least the trace of water on that planet.
Yeah, absolutely. And the question now is, where has the water gone? Did it just evaporate? Has it gone into hydrated minerals and things like that? And that's going to be probably the next generation of exploration on Mars, I think, looking for it.
And with water comes life.
Well, yeah, but there's a lot of things you need on top of water just to create life.
I think Rob's a bit of a skeptic when it comes to life on Mars.
Well, I'm not a skeptic, and I'm definitely not a cynic. But I think there's just a lot of things that need to come together to form life. And the question of whether they were ever all together on Mars is a really interesting one to ask.
And we can ask that question next week on Science Files when Dr. Rob returns. That's called the segue in the business. Thank you, Dr. Rob. And thank you to all of our guests that took time out of their day to join the program and share their knowledge. It makes for a fantastic program. Thank you to you for dialing the numbers and joining the conversation. You make my day each and every day that you do it. Tomorrow on the program, we're going to dig into the ideas floated by the PC party about the bridge tolls. Is taking the toll off the McDonald and McKay bridges a good idea? Political scientist Tom Urbaniak will be joining us. Also, we're going to shine a light on Thank a Business Month with the Better Business Bureau, and their president and CEO Julia Lewis will be joining us. Thanks to Vanessa Vandenez on the other side of the glass for keeping me in line as best she can. We're back tomorrow starting at 10 a.m. Until then, everybody, stay out of trouble and remember, be kind to one another.